7. Talking Union. "Escaped?" hissed Ishtar furiously. "Escaped? You call that a report?" The terrified captain of the guard shook his head. The rest of his body was shaking without any conscious effort on his part. "There was," he began, hardly knowing what to say. "We almost had Gilgamesh, but then something happened." Ishtar seemed to slide towards him from the depths of her sanctum, her pale skin shimmering in the gloom that she preferred. "What happened," she whispered dangerously, "is that you were incompetent fools, and you failed me." "No," the guardsman insisted. "There was some kind of divine intervention that saved him." "Then you had better pray for some divine intervention of your own," Ishtar warned him. "I will not tolerate fools and failure." "I swear it," the unfortunate man cried, then screamed as Ishtar's hands gripped his head. He could see nothing but the silver sheen of her flesh as he felt his neck begin to twist. "Mercy," he croaked. "This is mercy," she hissed in his ear. "Had I the time, then you would die much more painfully." The pleasing sound of the snapping of bones made her smile, and the man ceased struggling. She released the corpse and let it fall to the stone floor. Paying it no more attention, she glanced at Dumuzi. "My priest," she purred. "He was a poor choice for the mission. Perhaps Aga deliberately chose him, knowing that he would fail and thus anger me." Dumuzi, gathering what individual thoughts he still retained, shook his head. "No, goddess, I doubt it. Would he run the risk of angering you? Especially with your threat against his daughter so fresh in his mind." "True," Ishtar said. "Then why was Gilgamesh not captured?" "You do not believe that there may have been some deity that intervened on his behalf?" Dumuzi asked. "Superstitious nonsense," Ishtar laughed. "You and I both know better than to believe in gods, don't we, Dumuzi?" Knowing little now that she did not allow him to think, Dumuzi did not reply. He forbore to give the obvious reply that she herself was proof of divine intervention. But Ishtar caught the scent of this thought anyway, and whirled about to face him down. "You think that another like myself might be here, Dumuzi?" she said. "Ah, I see in the dim, dark closets of your mind that you pray someone might come to free you from me. How delightful! Despite my restraints, there is still some portion of your tiny brain where you possess a touch of individuality. No matter. When it suits me, I shall seek it out and devour it. Until then, let it hide and fear." She wrapped an arm about Dumuzi's shoulder. "It pleases me to enlighten you, my priest. I am not a goddess such as you think of the term. I was once as human as you are, and as frail." She tapped her beautiful features and enjoyed the strange bell-like sound that rang out. "Behind this mask lies a mind that once knew the pleasures and follies and pains of flesh. But then I discovered the potential of cybernetics, Dumuzi, and now I am no longer prey to the ills and sorrows of the flesh, nor am I limited by the shackles of one form or one mind. I was born centuries ago on a world that lies half a universe from this tiny planet, and I became its queen, its goddess. But there were some that refused my touch and who fought against me. In the end, I had to flee." She glanced sharply up at him. "Fool! I could see that thought as clearly as if you had shouted it from the rooftops. If they could make me flee, you dared to hope that they could come here, seeking me out." She laughed scornfully. "I am not one to leave enemies in my wake, Dumuzi. When I fled that wretched planet, they discovered what it is to scorn my power." With a cruel curl to her lips, she bent to stare into his eyes. "I left behind only the smoking embers of a planet, priest. A burnt-out, lifeless hunk of a world. Do not even dream of freedom from me. If such a thing is even possible, then when I leave this world of yours, it'll be as a void and as a devastation behind me. I would wipe out every last insect from the surface of this planet sooner than allow anyone to think that they could best me. Turning slowly away again, she began to glide back into the darkness. Over her shoulder she called, "If you wish to pray, Dumuzi, then pray that nothing angers me, because if it does, then I shall destroy the human race utterly from the face of the earth." There came a quiet rapping at the door to Ninani's room. The princess glanced up and called, "Come!" The door opened, and Puabi ushered in a young girl, barely as old as the princess herself. "My niece," she explained. It was more than apparent that N'Gula was one of the votaries of Ishtar. She was well-formed and pretty, with dark eyes and short-cropped dark hair that fell only to the base of her neck. Her bronzed skin shone from the oils that were used to keep her body pure. Apart from her sandals and the band about her forehead that bore the insignia of Ishtar, she wore only a simple skirt. Her bare breasts marked her clearly as one of the priestesses of the goddess of love. As she entered the room, she slid quietly and simply into a kneeling position before Ninani and bowed to the floor. "Rise," the princess commanded, studying the other girl as she obeyed. Though she was clearly aware of her inferior rank, the girl seemed at ease and confident. "Are you not curious as to why I wanted to speak with you, child?" N'Gula stared back, clearly studying the princess in her turn. Then she glanced back at her aunt and moved one eyebrow slightly. "Your maidservant seemed to think that you were interested in my knowledge, Highness." "My maidservant had better mind her own business then," Ninani answered. "And while she is about it, she can fetch us a little wine." Puabi took the hint and vanished. Rising to her feet, Ninani circled the acolyte, examining her carefully for the mark of Ishtar. Her father always did this, she knew, and he had explained that all who were touched by Ishtar bore her mark on their bodies somewhere, generally on the brow or temples. N'Gula seemed free from all bodily blemishes, which was, after all, one of the requirements of any who wished to serve Ishtar in a physical role. Her body must be free from any imperfection, as such blemishes would nullify the offering of herself. Having circled the girl, Ninani sat down again. "How old are you, child?" she asked. 13, N'Gula replied carefully. "And how long have you been in the service of Ishtar?" "Since I was 7. Seeing the surprise in Ninani's eyes, she added, "My mother died at that time, and I was taken as a child into the temple. I became one of the priestesses only a year ago. Until then I helped to clean and to look after the other priestesses." Wistfully, Ninani murmured, "You must have seen a lot of life, child." Shrugging, N'Gula sniffed, "I should think that you see as much as I, princess. You are captive within the palace, I within the temple." An unexpected answer, and Ninani realized that this girl was no fool. "You do not like your life? Who am I to complain?" Despite her words, it was quite clear that N'Gula was complaining. "I am an orphan, and have been given a steady job and a good home." "But," the princess prompted. Abruptly, N'Gula laughed. "My lady, you didn't bring me here to hear the temple gossip." The door opened, and Puabi backed in, carrying a tray. On it were a silver pitcher and 2 goblets, one silver, one bronze. Ninani held her tongue as Puabi filled the silver goblet with the dark wine and passed it to her. The maid then filled the bronze cup and gave it to N'Gula. When she looked up again, Ninani gestured at the door. "What?" Puabi snorted. "Am I to fetch my niece and not learn why?" "Yes," Ninani replied. "You are. Now go." Meekly, Puabi left. Glancing back at the other girl, Ninani saw a flash of a smile in her eyes. "If you know your aunt at all," she explained, "then you know of her astounding capacity for carrying gossip. I would like as little as possible of that to be about me." "Wise princess," N'Gula agreed. "But may I learn why you sent for me?" Ninani sipped her wine and gazed evenly at the other girl. Now that the princess had drunk, The priestess was free to do likewise, and did. Etiquette and social order was rigid, and always obeyed. "Engula," Ninani said slowly, "you were wrong when you said that I did not want to hear the temple gossip. That is exactly what I wish to hear." The priestess shrugged. "Lady, if you really want to hear about who drinks too much and who is sleeping with which nobleman, then I could tell you. Forgive me, though, but it seems beneath your dignity." Sniffing, Ninani nodded. "And so it is. The antics of your brood of harlots do not interest me at all. It is Ishtar I wish to know about." The girl stiffened at this. "You require religious instruction?" she asked carefully. "My lady, I do not think that it would be fitting for you to serve in the beds of the temple, unless you wished it, of course." Then another thought occurred to her. "Or," she glanced at the door leading to the bedroom at the far end of the room, "am I here to serve in your bed?" Ninani sighed. "Does everyone in your family think of nothing but sex?" she chided. "I am not interested in becoming one of Ishtar's whores, Engula. Nor did I call you here to seduce you. I want to know about the goddess Ishtar herself." Getting to her feet again, she started to pace the room. "I know what has been told me by my father," she explained, "that the goddess has condescended to visit with us a while. What I do not understand is why the thought should terrify him so, nor do I understand what is happening in the temple. I have known Dumuzi for years, but of late he's not been the man I grew up with. I want to know why." She stared at Engula. "Can you help me?" The priestess warily put down her cup. It was obvious she was fighting back some urge to speak, one that eventually got the better of her. "My lady," she said carefully, "this may cause some offence, but may I first ask a favour of you?" Ninani shrugged. "Speak." "May I touch your skin for a moment?" Puzzled, Ninani nodded. Engula came in close and then brushed the long hair from the princess's brow. Sighing with relief, she allowed the hair to fall back. "I am sorry, lady," she replied, "but I had to be certain that you had not been touched. To speak freely with one who had the touch of Ishtar would have meant my death, or worse." Curiously, Ninani listened as the priestess talked. "When the goddess came among us," Engula explained, "she was not strong. Dumuzi told us all that she had been on a long journey down to the world below the stars and heavens above. He said that she needed to rest and regain her energy. Then she would be herself. Well, it made sense, of sorts, about as much sense as anything that the gods ever do. So we carried on, honoured by her visit, and waited. Then several of the older priestesses vanished. There was no explanation for this given us, and a few of the others changed. They had all received the touch of Ishtar. Now they served as her eyes and ears, and she learned all that they knew. If anyone spoke in their presence against the goddess, well, they tended to vanish, or else they too bore the touch and changed. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me," she shrugged. "It's a curse I suffer from, lady. A family trait, I suspect. I wish to know too much." "The both of us," Ninani replied, liking this girl. "Speak on." "The goddess had taken over several of the larger rooms. I had been a cleaner, as I mentioned, and I know a few less obvious ways into these rooms." She didn't clarify. The princess would have no interest in the times she had been hungry and sought food wherever she could steal it within the temple. "I had seen the goddess, of course. She would come out into the aisles of the temple from time to time to be seen by her worshippers. But I had never been summoned into her private rooms. One evening I heard strange noises coming from behind the main altar where Ishtar's sanctum lies. I used my knowledge of the secret ways of the temple. The innermost of Ishtar's room has a balcony around it, and I crept into it. The noise was coming from below me, a humming noise, but rising and falling like bees buzzing in a rhythm. And there was a strange silver glow that flared and faded with the humming. It was dark in the shadows on the balcony, and I was scared. But I had to look over the edge. I had to see." She shuddered and lifted her wide, dark eyes to stare at Ninani. "I wish I hadn't looked, lady. The goddess was there. She was as beautiful as ever, tall and pale and glorious. But she seemed to be dead. She was completely still. She was standing against the wall, in the one place where the wall was not covered by the tall metal cabinets that the goddess had brought down from her buried ziggurat in the wilderness. The space she was standing in looked like a sarcophagus, lady. My heart went out to Ishtar then. Her head was covered by a metal hood, and the hood was the source of the humming. She was naked, and I saw that although she has a woman's shape, she is not made as a woman is made. All these things I saw in just a few moments, and then the goddess moved. She stepped from beneath the hood like a body stepping out of its grave. Her eyes opened, and I ducked into the shadows. "It sounds terrifying," Ninani said, imagining the punishments for spying on a goddess. Angula shook her head. Her eyes were bright with tears. "It was only just beginning," she said. "Ishtar was with me on the balcony. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her there in the darkness with me, hunting me. I have never been so afraid. I did not dare to make a sound, but I could sense her here in my head, seeking me out, and I had to move. I crawled on my hands and knees round and round the balcony as fast as I could, like an animal in a trap. I could feel her eyes below me, as if her sight could pierce the floorboards of the balcony. She was playing with me as a cat plays with a mouse. She could have pounced on me at any time, but I could feel her amusement as I crawled hither and thither above her." The girl started to sob quietly. "What happened?" Ninani said, too excited to let Angula stop at this critical moment. Angula sniffed twice and wiped her eyes. "The goddess was distracted, lady. She forgot about me. Dumuzi and one of the palace guards had entered the room below me. They had brought 2 priestesses to receive the touch of Ishtar. I felt her eyes leave me, and after a while I found the courage to drag myself to the edge of the balcony and look down. I knew the priestesses, my lady. One of them, Belkelly, had been kind to me ever since I entered the temple. She was struggling in the arms of the guard. The other priestess was on the floor, asleep or unconscious or drugged. Ishtar did not cover her nakedness. She stood in the centre of the room, drinking in the sight of Belkelly's fear. And then she began to change." "Change? How?" Ninani breathed. Angula gave a long sigh. "I think the gods look like us only because we would shun them if we were to see their true forms," she said carefully. "Ishtar is not like us. She's made of metal, my lady. She is a living statue. And although her arms and shoulders are like those of a woman, she had the body of a serpent. No legs, my lady. She writhes across the floor like a snake, a gigantic metal snake. And her face is worse, because it is so nearly like a woman's face, but hard and cold and sharp, with movements that are not supple like the expressions on your face or mine, but that are like the twitching of an insect's legs, and instead of eyes, she has burning coals set in her head. I think I screamed, but any noise I made was drowned by Belkelly's yells as the goddess slithered towards her. Ishtar spoke quietly and cruelly and stretched out her right hand. I could see Belkelly shaking as the goddess stroked her hair. Ishtar's hand reached Belkelly's forehead, and I heard the sound like the hiss of a snake. Belkelly stopped moving, and when Ishtar removed her hand, I could see the mark on Belkelly's forehead. I could not stay to watch any more. I felt ill. I crawled away. When I met Belkelly the next day, she was different. She had no kind words for me, no gossip. I asked her if she was well, and she replied as if I were a stranger. The worst of it was that even as she spoke in a dull voice and would not meet my gaze, I saw a tear gather in the corner of her eye. Ninani tried to keep her voice calm. "And the other priestesses?" "I never saw her again," Angula said. "But I spoke to one of the guards, one who at that time had not received the touch, who told me that he had helped to dispose of her body. Her veins were drained of their blood, my lady, and her brains were missing from her skull." Ninani was as appalled as Angula. Seeing the girl fighting back the wave of horror, Ninani threw aside her dignity and rank. She grabbed the girl, pulling her close. Like a baby, Angula clutched at her, sinking her head onto Ninani's shoulder. Great sobs of pain shook her. Finally, she shook herself free of Ninani's compassionate embrace and stood up. She wiped at her nose and eyes. "I am sorry, my lady," she whispered. "It was so terrible to see." "It is almost as terrible to hear about it, Engula," Ninani assured her. "But now you do not have to keep it all to yourself. Let us be friends." Surprised, Engula nodded. "As you wish, Princess." "Good." Ninani led the girl to her couch and gestured for her to sit beside her there. Somewhat hesitantly, Engula did so. "Now then, my friend, there is one thing I must know from you. This goddess you serve, how do you feel about your oaths now?" Engula considered her reply very carefully. "Lady, I am sorry for the first time in my life that I ever came to serve Ishtar." "That's what I hoped to hear," Ninani smiled, but without warmth. "Because I want your help, Engula. I wish to destroy this goddess before she destroys us all." Shocked, Engula jumped to her feet. "Lady," she cried, "it is not possible, surely." "It must be possible," the princess insisted. "You and I must find some weakness in her, or some magic that can overcome her. There must be something we can do. There must be." "I am not as certain as you are, lady," replied the priestess. "But, well, the alternative is to keep on living as I do, whilst Ishtar touches or eats my friends." Resolutely she shook aside her forebodings. "I will do all that I can," she agreed. Ninani laughed, this time with real pleasure. "Excellently spoken. Engula, whatever a princess and a priestess can accomplish, we shall do. Let us only pray it will suffice." Ace found the city of Kish quite amazing. Despite her worries, Gilgamesh had kept his mouth shut at the gate, and the four of them had been hurried through without exciting any interest in the guards. Once inside, they began to wend their way through the narrow, crowded streets. Close to the gate was the merchant section. Shops that looked very similar to pictures Ace had seen of the Middle East in her times lined the streets. Canopies kept the sun off both products and people. The wares were laid out on tables or mats for inspection. Fruits, vegetables, tools, cloth, clothing and pots were plentiful. Though most traders were now packing up for the day, there were enough wares still on display for her to realise that Kish was a prosperous city. She mentioned this to Enkidu, who nodded in agreement. "Kish and Uruk, the city we come from, have been the biggest two powers in the whole of Mesopotamia for as long as can be recalled," he explained. "Gilgamesh and his advisors think that Kish's day is done, but the king of Kish, Aga, is no fool, and his policies have built up both the army and the wealth of this town." Ace glanced back at Gilgamesh. "I gather you don't agree." "Who am I to agree or not? I have no real voice in council, and I'm only allowed to hang around because Gilgamesh likes me. None of the nobles will listen to my ideas." "I would," Ace assured him. "You're an unusual person then," he smiled. "My ideas are strange, I warn you. I think that Uruk and Kish would get along better if they were allies rather than enemies. When I was a child, my mother told me that the reason my people died out is that we could not cooperate. These hairless humans took advantage of that folly and managed to destroy my race. I've always been afraid that the same thing might happen to all humans one day." "Trust me," Ace told him. "The human race will be around for a good long time yet." "Of course I trust you," Enkidu replied simply. "You are the goddess Aya." "Right," she sighed. "I keep forgetting that bit." The doctor stopped a few of the passers-by and asked directions to a good inn. After the men finally agreed on one, the doctor led the other three there. It stood just off the main street and was a small building. Ace judged that it couldn't have more than 5 or 6 rooms, and was hardly surprised when she had heard the innkeeper telling the doctor that he had exactly 1 room left, take it or leave it. "We'll take it," the doctor told him. Nodding to Enkidu, he said, "Pay the man, will you?" Enkidu did so, counting over the copper discs with care. Ace tugged on the doctor's sleeve. "Oi!" she complained. "Professor? I don't mind sharing a room with you, but I'm not so sure about his high and mightiness there." "Gilgamesh?" The doctor seemed uninterested. "Oh, he'll probably get roaring drunk and pass out. I know his sort." "So do I," Ace snapped. "I met plenty on Iceworld. Some of them just get drunk and make passes. If you're worried about your virtue, the doctor replied, you could always go back to the TARDIS. She sighed. According to Enkidu, there are lions on the prowl at night. Well, make up your mind. The lions out there or the wolves in here? Thanks a lot, she grumbled, and sat at the closest table. You're all hearts. One of my failings, he replied, dropping onto one of the stools himself. Innkeeper, beers over here if you would, and have one yourself on us. Enkidu joined them. Let me guess, he said in resignation. I pay for the drinks too. You don't expect a couple of deities to carry money, do you? The doctor asked rhetorically. We've better things to do with our time. The innkeeper put down 4 pots of barley beer and accepted Enkidu's coins with alacrity. Gilgamesh grabbed his beer and downed it in 2 gulps. Have mine, the doctor offered, pushing it across, and Ace'll probably give you hers too. I'm old enough to drink my own, she retorted, unwilling to give Gilgamesh anything at all of her own. Yes, but I doubt it'll be to your liking, he told her, watching Gilgamesh making massive inroads on the second beer. It's hardly likely to win camera approval. Sullenly, Ace took a sip and almost spat it out. What's this made out of? Pig vomit? Close, the doctor smiled. Barley. They've not yet invented the sort of beer you'd like. To the natives of this time, that's ambrosia. Don't you mean ammonia? Right, the doctor said, getting to his feet. I'm not going to be long. Enjoy yourself. What? Ace couldn't believe her ears. I'm coming too. Not this time, he said, pushing her back onto the stool. I'm just popping out to take a peek in the local temple. You stay here and look after Gilgamesh. Try and talk to some locals. Get the gossip, that sort of thing. I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't do this to me, Professor, she begged. Not with him. Suffering builds the character, he replied. In a conspiratorial whisper he added, Ace, I could be wrong about this temple being so important, but Gilgamesh is vital. I really need you to stick with him and make certain nothing happens to him. He's destined to do a great deal in his lifetime, and I'd feel happier if I knew he had a rest of his lifetime. And what about me? You can rest later, he winked. Just keep the drinks flowing and keep your ears open. Saluting her briefly with his umbrella, the doctor slipped out of the door. Ace stared unhappily across the table at Gilgamesh. He had just stolen her beer and was making inroads on that too. It was going to be a very long evening.